So what stories have been catching your eye?
So, first of all, obviously, as an Australian, I've been very focused on the Djokovic story and his travails in Australia. A problem that he's really brought upon himself, because although you could criticise Australia's really strict rules in dealing with COVID, and they have been, depends on the state, but they have been very draconian. He knew the rules, as did all the other tennis players coming to the Australian Open, and they were as simple as this. If you've been vaccinated, you can come in. If you haven't been vaccinated, you have to spend 2 weeks in quarantine. So he wants to avoid going into quarantine, though he didn't last year. Last year he did go for 2 weeks into quarantine and won the Australian Open. So he wants to avoid it, and he's tried to break the rules. And needless to say, the Australian government is, in a country like Australia, never going to make an exception from the rules for a tennis player. For the great and the powerful, there isn't one set of rules. You know, there are rules for everybody. All punters have to abide by the rules, and Djokovic is expected to as well. So it's as simple as that.
So he's been in, he's been out, he's been in. He's now, I think, got to go back to court again to appeal the decision of the government. Is he going to win his appeal?
You never quite know, but I wouldn't imagine so.
Okay.
So yes, he won a court case initially last Monday on the basis of due process, which is that the Border Force officers didn't give him sufficient time to provide the evidence that they were asking for. So the judge concluded that it was unfair, if you like. As I say, it didn't sort of meet the standards of natural justice. So presumably he'll hope that the federal court, as it's called, the federal court will come to a similar conclusion this time. But I mean, you never know with the courts, but I doubt it. And just to say this, because, you know, you're both MPs, the Australian public, the average person, think about those people. Don't always think about the...
And that's what I was going to ask. What do the Australian public think of this?
They think there's one rule for Djokovic and there's one rule for them, and it's the same rule. That's what they think. They're very egalitarian. Yeah. And as I keep saying to people...
And they've had a strict lockdown.
They've had a terrible time. I mean, Melbourne had the longest lockdown of any city in the world. It had 6 lockdowns of a total of 262 days.
I mean, what do you make of all this, the Australian approach to COVID? Because to some of us here, it looks as if they've lost the plot with some of the illiberal measures that they've been making. What do you think?
I think they've been way too illiberal. I mean, my basic approach to COVID is that you should make your own judgments, and the role of the government is to protect the vulnerable. Not to lock down the whole of society, but in Australia it's been quite extreme. As I was saying, Melbourne has had the longest lockdown of any city in the world, even surpassing its nearest competitor, which was Buenos Aires. I mean, I think Australians, they loved it all because they thought it protected them from COVID. And these governments, and I say governments because it includes state governments, pursued a zero COVID approach, which of course is unsustainable. It's never going to be achieved.
But Novak, is this bad advice from his advisors telling him to go to Australia and sort of demand a different rule for him? Or is it sort of posturing? Because people say maybe one day he's going to be the Prime Minister of his home country, of Serbia.
No, I think it's bad advice. I'm sorry to say it's really bad decision-making on his part. Well, you know, he takes responsibility, but his team have made a series of very bad decisions. And, you know, Australia is a tough kind of a country. So, you know, they'll kick him out if they have to kick him out. They won't stop.
They won't mess around. And other stories on the front page is about the royal family, is about Prince Andrew. And again, looking down under to your country, the Republican Party are now saying we'll have another referendum. The Queen won't be the head of state. Will this pass? Will the Australians vote for that?
Well, I think for as long as the Queen is there, Australians won't want to have another referendum. There was one in 1999. As I said to the Queen myself, I'm one of very few people in this world who has voted for you, ma'am.
What did she say back? Are you allowed to say, or you're not meant to?
She didn't say it. She like Philip, she laughed.